Hi, this is Helen Kelly with DMA, and today we're going to be walking through the written standards training for rapid rehousing for the Western PA CoC. Now, before we get into specific program level content, we just want to explain what the written standards actually are. Yes, they are required by HUD. However, even more than that, they provide guidance for CoC and ESG programs related to service delivery. So this should be seen as a tool for you to kind of help you understand how to implement your programming, and whether someone needs a refresher or there's turnover in your organization, anyone could be guided to these trainings to really get an understanding about how to operate each program. And like I said, in this particular session with rapid rehousing specifically, we want to make sure that all programs throughout the Western PA CoC are operating in consistent, coordinated ways that's compliant with HUD and CoC standards. Now, that said, if you haven't already attended or watched the trainings on the standards for all program types, please make sure you do that. Either pause now and go ahead and go watch that, or immediately following this, because this training focuses on requirements that are specific to the rapid rehousing project type. And when you go back into the written standards for all project types, a lot, or actually all of that content will also pertain to rapid rehousing. So the things that we're going to cover today are just the nuances that are specific to this project type. Now, in the event that you haven't seen the general training for the entire written standards yet, we just wanted to take a moment to let you know how they are structured. And it begins with standards for all project types, which, as I just mentioned, will also be relevant to you as rapid rehousing providers. It includes information such as record keeping, case management standards, anything that would be the same no matter which project type you're operating. And then it goes one by one through each specific project type, which would include permanent supportive housing, homeless prevention, rapid rehousing, street outreach, supportive services only with CE, emergency shelter, and rapid rehousing, and rapid rehousing transitional housing. Now, beyond that, we have appendices, and the appendices are supplemental resources of items that are referenced throughout the standards. For example, the HUD definition of homelessness chart is an appendix. Now, one other item, which is really more of a companion piece to the standards as opposed to being a part of the standards themselves, are templates. This is a totally separate document. Use of these specific templates are not required, but are available as a resource. That said, many of the actual templates there, that type of template would be required in some form or fashion. So things like a lease are required across the board. Things like documenting income are required across the board. So if you don't have templates in place yet for those sorts of things, and you would like to tap into this as a resource, you may. If you do have templates, but you want to reconcile what you have with these templates, then you may. If you have a regional project and you would like to see the subrecipients document in the same way, then these templates might be for you. So they're there just as a resource and hopefully help to streamline your processes as you go about implementing the programs. All right, so that is enough background material. We are going to dive into the written standards for rapid rehousing now. In terms of accessing rapid rehousing programming, 100% of referrals must come through the coordinated entry system, and projects must follow the CoC order of prioritization when filling vacancies. More on that prioritization in a couple of slides. All right, so now we're going to take a couple of minutes talking about eligibility for Rapid, and this is incredibly nuanced, so I'm going to try and break it up into bite-sized chunks, but all of this is further explained in the written standard, so please feel free to reference that document as much as you need. Generally speaking, to be eligible for Rapid Rehousing, a household must be either Category 1, which is literally homeless, or Category 4, which is fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence. They must be unable to access housing without assistance, and there are no income requirements at the time of enrollment. Where income comes into play is for determining rent contributions, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and for annual recertifications to determine ongoing eligibility if applicable. But it definitely has no bearing on their eligibility in the beginning. Now, these are some of the nuances that I had mentioned that exist. For ESG funded Rapid only, a household can be 4, meaning Category 4, but they must also be Category 1. So how does that play out? So if a household is fleeing from domestic violence and they're also in a shelter, perhaps a domestic violence shelter, or they are also in a place not meant for human habitation, perhaps their vehicle, then they are eligible for ESG. However, if they are fleeing, but they don't meet a Category 1 definition, then they are ineligible for ESG Rapid Rehousing. Okay, moving on to another nuance related to chronic eligibility while in this program type. If someone was chronically homeless prior to going into a Rapid project type, they get to maintain that chronic status throughout their stay and upon exit then in a Rapid Rehousing program. Now, the last bit of nuance here has to do with transferring into a Rapid Rehousing program from transitional housing. And this can get a little confusing, so I'm going to try and break it down. Again, though, it is all written out for you in the written standards. Now, if a household is in a HUD-funded TH or transitional housing program, they are ineligible to go into a Rapid Rehousing program. However, this does not apply to the CoC funded THRR project type, in which case a household can be duly enrolled in both of them if that's what the client chooses. Now, the last part of this is that related to ESG, if someone is coming out of transitional housing and they cannot maintain after they are discharged, meaning they don't have any other resources, then they may be enrolled into an ESG funded Rapid Rehousing program. So there's a lot going on there. Play it back if you need to, but definitely reference the written standards if any of these situations seems like they might be playing out in your organization. All right, so now since there are insufficient resources to meet the entire universe of eligible households, the Western PA CoC has decided upon an order of prioritization. The very first priority for Rapid Rehousing programs are those who are showing up that are chronically homeless and Category 1 with their highest VI SPDAT score. From there, you work your way down. If there are no, meaning work your way down by score. If there are no chronically homeless and literally homeless households, then you would move on to non-chronic households, but who were still Category 1, literally homeless, with the highest VI SPDAT score. After that, you're going to be looking at the non-chronic, literally homeless households with the longest length of time homeless. The full order of prioritization can be found in the written standards, so please go back to that because there are some more details that might be relevant. And beyond that, although transfers into rapid rehousing are eligible in some instances, like we just saw on the previous slide, those TH residents will not be prioritized for rapid rehousing transfers due to this current order of prioritization. The only exception to that is those that are duly enrolled in the, or would be duly enrolled in the TH RRH project types. Another note on prioritization is that projects should definitely be considering a household county of preference for chronically homeless households. However, before moving on to the non-chronic households, as we just saw with that order of prioritization on the previous slide, rapid rehousing projects really should be identifying chronically homeless household residing anywhere in the CoC and offer their rapid rehousing opening first. If they've done that and truly no chronic households are willing to move into that area, which is absolutely their choice, then at that time the program may move on to serving non-chronic households. Now, one last note regarding prioritization has to do with emergency transfers due to domestic violence. If an emergency transfer is needed in this case, providers should offer an alternate unit within their organization's own inventory whenever possible. If that alternate unit is not available, the provider should follow the process outlined in the emergency transfer plan, which is also referenced in the written standards. Emergency transfer requests may be expedited and prioritized in order to identify a housing resource for which the participant or household is eligible as soon as possible. There are some documentation needs that are specific to rapid rehousing, along with some other project types. However, they're not required across the board, so they are not included in the documentation for all project types that were highlighted in another training. So as related to rapid, anything that's here with an asterisk is also available in template form should you want to reference that. First item that's needed is documentation of homelessness. This can be a self-declaration as a last resort, but typically it would be a either like a shelter agreement or an outreach worker or caseworker able to verify that a person is experiencing homelessness. Whenever possible, there should be a little narrative about what they've witnessed, and feel free to accompany that with any pictures as well. And basically what the template shows is what type of proof that particular caseworker is using to establish eligibility under the homeless eligibility, and then along with attaching that proof to it. An executed lease is also required. There is a landlord agency agreement that's required for ESG, and that is just like what it says, it's between the landlord and the agency that's providing the rapid rehousing assistance. There's some standard terms that are included in that, and so there is a template provided. A past inspection is also needed. However, they're different for ESG and CoC project types. So for ESG, minimum habitability standards is what's required. There is a template for that inspection. For CoC, the housing quality standards, or HQS, is what's required. It's a bit of a longer, more itemized inspection. Now, the past inspection needs to be on file before the lease is fully executed and before the landlord agency agreement is in place in cases of ESG. There needs to be housing stability plans in every single case file. These can vary greatly, so there is a template provided for you to kind of start pointing you in the right direction, especially if you are newer to implementing rapid rehousing. There are additional documentation needs, but like I mentioned, they are applicable to all of the different projects. So you will find that in the other training that has to do with general requirements for all project types. The next several slides will have to do with the duration and amount of assistance. Now, the amount of rental assistance is highly individualized. Whenever possible, the level of subsidy, it should lessen over time. So the project will be paying less and less toward rent, while the participant pays more and more until the participant is paying in full and exits the project. Typically, that's how that will go. Rent might, the subsidy might increase in times of job loss or temporary setbacks. And also, the average length of subsidy, our goal is 6 months in the Western PA CoC. Some households may be less, some may be more, but the average goal is 6 months. And what happens at that 6-month mark is the Western PA CoC really wants organizations to be thinking critically at that mark if the household really needs to have this subsidy in order to remain stabilized. They should only be receiving as much assistance as necessary to end their homelessness and stabilize that household. However, it is understood that some households may need longer amounts of assistance in extenuating circumstances. And each project should be creating their own internal extension approval process if more support is needed. So what the CoC doesn't want to see happen is that at that 6-month mark, someone thinks they need more subsidy, so it's just a blanket approval for another 3 months or another 6 months without taking a look at what's going on with that household and if that subsidy is actually continued to be in need. To help give you some guiding ideas around what might constitute an extenuating circumstance or what might justify an extension, here's a couple of items that you might want to be thinking about, and they're also highlighted in the written standards. So a participant with recent job loss might fall into this category. Someone who is a transition age youth, so like generally that 18 to 24 age. Someone who's paying fines, a participant who has recently been incarcerated or hospitalized, someone who is waiting for a permanent supportive housing unit or a housing choice voucher, and there is reason to believe that that individual will receive such a subsidy within a reasonable amount of time. And that it will, reasonable meaning that it will be obtained before the maximum time allowed for rapid rehousing is reached. So per HUD, the absolute maximum is 24 months. So no household can go beyond that, even in extenuating circumstances. So if we think that someone will get a housing choice voucher within 6 months and they've already received 6 months of assistance, it would likely be justified that they could then continue receiving that assistance if you think they wouldn't be able to stay stabilized for the next 6 months until they got that voucher. So that was some general guidance. That said, there are some specific guidelines that are outlined in the written standards. First and foremost is that first month's rent can be offered in full to assist the household. Now, please be sure that if the first month's rent is prorated in any way, that prorated amount for the first month is also mentioned in your lease, along with what rent would be in full for every month thereafter. There are specific guidance around how to prorate and things of that nature within the written standards. Now, if the tenant is responsible for paying their own utilities, grantees must follow the requirements for utility payments and reimbursement, and that is highlighted within the written standards. And so you'll definitely want to check out the nuances for your specific funder. For ESG funded projects, unit rent must not exceed fair market rent, and it must not exceed rent reasonableness. Please be sure in your case files that you have documentation for both of these items in your charts. For rent reasonableness, you would be showing your 3 comps. For CoC funded projects, rent can exceed FMR, but in no cases may it exceed rent reasonableness. Here's some specific standards to rapid rehousing. The Western PA CoC wanted to ensure that providers were enrolling households into HMIS at the time that both the households and the provider decided to work with each other, and not waiting until housing was achieved. So once there's that established relationship that the households will seek permanent housing through rapid rehousing, they will be enrolled at that time, and then whatever their exit destination is, when they need to be exited, that will be reflected during the exit assessment. So hopefully everyone has a successful exit into permanent housing, or they self-resolve, or things of that nature. But whatever that housing situation is, that will be reflected at the time of exit, and not that everyone that is getting enrolled in rapid rehousing has a successful placement to permanent housing because people are waiting until housing is found to enroll them. Once they're enrolled and then they find permanent housing, that's when projects can go back into HMIS and add in a move-in date. Exit planning should always start from day 1 at the time of enrollment, so that the household is always working toward that self-sufficiency, working on their housing goal plans, linking with mainstream resources, things of that nature. And income is reassessed at least quarterly, but that's for the purposes of adjusting rental payments. It is not for eligibility purposes. Income plays into eligibility definitely at that annual assessment mark, because if a household is over income at that time, then they must be discharged. When you're looking at it quarterly, you're looking to see if rent really needs to go up or down, and there's some more information about that in the written standards, in the document itself. But typically, like, even if someone, whatever that income threshold is at the annual assessment, if someone is over that at the quarterly assessment, but they really haven't stabilized yet, because truth be told, that income threshold is not all that high, they can still stay in and receive the subsidy amount that is appropriate for them. Now, if they are over and they are also totally stabilized, then they can be discharged at that point successfully on the grounds that they have stabilized. There are some indicators that might tell the case manager or the household that they really are ready to move on from the rapid rehousing program. And these include meeting any of, or really meeting all of their goals that they had identified in their goal plan. It can mean that their housing crisis has resolved, that the household feels as though they have enough supports in place to maintain stabilization. And that can happen at any time, not just during these quarterly assessments of income. And so we just had kind of wanted to give some ideas of what you might want to be looking for in terms of household stabilization. So when we are talking about rapid rehousing, to the greatest extent possible, programs really should be providing housing locator services. This can be done at times within case management itself, although some programs may opt to have an actual housing locator, which oftentimes comes with a different set of skill sets needed than that of a case manager. And nonetheless, whoever is offering these housing locator services, they are going to be working with the landlords, recruiting them, providing education to them, providing outreach. They're going to be assisting households to find their appropriate rental housing, and they're going to help households negotiate their lease agreements. So in terms of case management with Rapid Rehousing, case manager meetings are required monthly. Additional meetings may be offered as needed so that the case management that is being offered is commensurate with need, but it's really up to the individual receiving assistance to accept that invitation for additional case management or to decline. Meetings should be in the client's home or in a mutually agreed upon community setting whenever possible. So what is trying to be avoided here is just requiring all households receiving assistance to show up at the case manager's office whenever there's to be a case management meeting. And there is an entire section of case management in the written standards. It's a new section in this rendition, and it's found in the general written standards training for all project types. So please be sure to kind of hone in on that part, especially since case management is so vital to rapid rehousing and the services that are being offered. These performance measures are fairly straightforward. I just want to make just a little bit of added context to this. So these are the types of things that our CoC will be scored on at the time of the NOFA. And so if we can successfully meet certain thresholds to receive certain points, then we will get more points overall, which will then rank our CoC higher than other CoCs. And the higher that we rank, the more funding we can obtain as a CoC. So that is a very high level overview of how it kind of all fits together, but it truly is very important because all of the individual projects feed into the CoC's scoring and ultimately where they rank and funding allocations. So it's really important to stay on top of your data, do regular data cleanups, and if you aren't able to look at all of your data, these key points are the ones that actually have to do with scoring. So if you had to choose, please look at these specific items. So clients exiting to permanent housing, we're looking at least 81% of households exiting to permanent housing. What happens here, where this number sometimes gets skewed, is that someone falls off a radar or a program ends, and then households just aren't exited. So then there's not any kind of exit into permanent housing. So, you know, those are things to be mindful of. We want to see that clients increase their income through either employment or benefits, and at least 48% of adults will be increasing their income. So something that kind of gets, or that can get overlooked, that we see a lot, is that whenever there is an increase to benefits such as Social Security, that increase may not always be reflected in HMIS. So the case manager knows that this person has Social Security, the household continues to have Social Security, that never changes, but then the bump never gets reflected either. So it's really important that those little bumps get put in HMIS, because it doesn't necessarily matter by how much they're increasing income, just that the income increases. So that's something really important to go back and make sure that bumps are in there. And then the amount of clients linked to mainstream benefits. We're looking at least 70% of the households. And a lot of this can be linked to like annual assessments as well. So if annual assessments aren't being done on households, then their mainstream benefits aren't necessarily being captured. Or same thing with exits to permanent housing. If those exit assessments aren't being done, then the mainstream assessments that they were linked to aren't necessarily being captured either. So just kind of letting you know where that information feeds into. And that clients don't return to homelessness within 2 years. That would be the last measure looked at for Rapid. So in terms of next steps, because we recognize that all programs may not be completely aligned with the written standards as they are currently written, and that you might need some time to make some adjustments. We're asking that all CoC and ESG funded programs sign off by July 1st, 2021, that their programs understand the standards and that you will implement them. And there's a form that is hyperlinked in the training. If there are standards that programs are not implementing, you must make a plan to implement those standards by September 1st, 2021. And feedback on the standards is welcome year round. So if there's something that you think is a really great addition, that's always nice to know. But if there's something where you think it can be fine-tuned, or maybe something was left out, or if something just seems really unreasonable, please indicate that by filling out the feedback form, and those items can be taken into consideration the next time that the standards are updated. So that's it. Thank you for sticking with me until the end. If you have any questions at all, please email westerncoc@pennsylvaniacoc.org. Thanks everyone. I hope you have a great day.